What you want is to be like, this event happens and therefore this happens. What you don't want to have is...
When you get to like editing, your brain has to switch, and now you're being a little more technical, and you're looking at prose, and you're looking at word choice or whatever. And
someone recommends a book on craft or marketing, and you go to Amazon, and there's that banner that says you bought this book 3 years ago, and you're like, oh.
There's no easy way to self-publishing success, but there are simpler ways, and probably the simplest way is to...
Hey folks, welcome to the BookFunnel podcast. This is episode 7, and I am joined today, of course, as always, by Emma Allison and Kelly Tansey, and our special guest today is Adam Stemple, an award-winning writer, a lead instructor, and co-owner of WrittenWell.com. Adam, welcome to the podcast. Good to have you
glad
here.
to be here.
Yeah, we got a chance to meet you in Las Vegas. People are going to notice a theme. A lot of our guests coming up, and we've met in Vegas, right? And
it's a great spot for schmoozing.
It really is.
That is true.
It really is. We decided, hey, we need to get together on the podcast, talk about what WrittenWell has to offer for authors, what BookFunnel has to offer for authors, a little bit of both. I think we have a fun conversation today, kind of around writing to market, which is has been a big topic in the self-publishing industry for a while. We'll get to all that eventually here. Before we do, I want to check in with Kelly, because I know we've been working on the reader magnet. We've kind of switched gears.
Mm-hmm.
Where are we at? Where are we at with that? Everybody at home wants to know.
Everybody wants to know about my reader magnet dramas. So I did write, I think I mentioned this in the last podcast. We didn't really talk specifically about it, but I did write a different reader magnet that's more of like a, at the end of the book kind of thing, not one that you offer up at the beginning. It's a bonus scene that is actually going to be going to a different book. I actually pretty much finished it. It's not completely like nailed in, but I got that. And then I had about 3,000 or 4,000 words. It wasn't a great week just with all the holiday stuff going on for the main books. So that's where I'm at. So there's my update. There it is.
I got 0 words. I got 0 words last week because I'm finishing up an edit. So
that's
still working.
That counts.
That counts. Absolutely.
It's harder to quantify, but it still counts as right.
It's one of those things. Emma, you mentioned last week this idea of people being a phoenix, right? Where like you write like in a fury in a storm, and then you finish, and then you don't write for a while. And
ironically, last week was my burnout week, and it comes in a 6 to 7 week cycle, and I could not get the motivation to write. I'm like, oh, it's like week 7 now.
Yeah,
like a writer's period.
I feel like editing does that to me just in general. Like I've tried in the past to do those two things at the same time. And I realized that I can't. I just can't. I have to focus on one or the other.
There's a switch in your brain that happens when you're doing the creative piece versus the editing piece. The creative piece is you're just letting your mind do the like imagining of this world or whatever. And then when you get to like editing, your brain has to switch, and now you're being a little more technical, and you're looking at prose, and you're looking at word choice or whatever, and it's different brain sets or mindset. So yeah, it's definitely, I've heard a lot of authors who say, I can't just like write in the morning and edit in the afternoon, or vice versa. Like it's your brain has to have a chance to switch between the two.
Yeah.
All right. I'm clearly going to be the freak on this podcast because I often use editing as a way to get into the writing.
Hey.
I like to edit the pages I did yesterday, and then that gets me into the flow.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I've heard of people being able to do that. Actually gets their flow going for the next chapters once they've been in that again while they're there.
I was remembering what I said before we started, which is that, writers love writing, but they hate sitting down to write. That's the hard part of writing.
Yes.
Writing is easy. Starting the writing is difficult.
Starting the writing is
right. Once you get into the groove, exactly. No, maybe I should try that, doing some editing, because it would be nice. The dream, right, is that it's all one smooth process, and you just edit what you wrote yesterday and then you write something new, it's worth a shot.
Wh-
I'm not going to rule
why-
it out.
Why can't it go smooth? Why can't it
Right.
ever go smooth?
Yes, right. Life, right? I've
Yeah.
got 3 small children at home, so
Oh, nice.
that's one factor. That, in fact, all of us have kids at home, of varying
Yeah,
ages.
my-
The 3
My kids at home are in their 20s, but
There you go. Hey, and that's a whole other situation there that I don't know anything about. So maybe I'm not prepared, but no, that's where I'm at. Emma, did you I thought you had a release coming up soon or something like that you were building up towards, or is that where we?
It's
that is the immortal writer sound. Ah.
See, what happened is I finally realized that for the last year, I've been spiraling. And it got to the point where I was so frustrated with the problem of me chasing new shiny and starting new projects. And I have like 12 projects in various states, so I can't get anything done. I went to coaching, one of Becca's coaches, Terry, and I hope this advice helps someone out there. But what he told me is we do not let the toddlers drive the car. And your desire to start, well, it was in the context of strengths, Clifton strengths, but in general, your desire to start all these new projects and chase joy is coming from your toddler. But you need to tell your toddler, this is the plan, and after you eat your dinner, you can have dessert. So
Ice
he
creams for closers.
he talked me into doing something I swore I would never do again, which is jap. I feel good about that decision, and I've been fighting it. But it makes sense from a business point of view. It makes sense from the goals I told him I wanted. So now my plan is back to a certain number of words in jap every day first, no matter what. And then I'll do my project A, which is the release that is coming sometime soon.
Yeah.
And then when that's all done, in theory, I haven't hit that yet, in theory, then I can work on my Kanzi projects, like whatever I feel like doing,
Yeah.
if I have
And
any energy left.
Jaff, for those who don't know, Jane Austen fan fiction. Emma is. Do you have an official title within the Jaff community? Are you, the queen
I
of?
am not that active in the Jeff community. My brain won't let me really develop more than one social media platform. So
No, I hear you.
yeah.
My oldest child is a huge Jane Austen fan and a avid fanfic writer.
Sweet. There you go.
You guys may have intersected many times already without knowing it.
There you go. There you go. All right. Well, it's time for us to get to our first segment here, self-publishing tips from the trenches. In this segment, we share with you some essential indie author tips, or tips for any author, whether you're an indie or even if you're traditionally published. These should be helpful tips on writing, but also the self-publishing side of things. Here at BookFunnel, the author support team, Emma, Kelly, and myself, we all happen to be indie authors. And so we also help authors on a day-to-day basis with not only using BookFunnel, but just navigating the tools in the indie author sphere that are out there. So we have a lot to say. Emma, you were going to go first today. What's your tip? What do you got for us?
Okay, it may seem kind of random, but work with me. And it came to me in a fit of exasperation. But you know how when someone recommends a book on craft or marketing and you go to Amazon and there's that banner that says you bought this book 3 years ago and you're like, okay. And then you go to your Kindle library and sure enough, it's there. Well, the other day I got so fed up with that I went into my Kindle library and organized all of my writing books by topic, voice, dialogue. This is on self-editing. And I discovered I have 6 books on writing fight scenes. And I still keep trying to buy more. But the new rule is that the toddler will check her library first.
This is amazing.
I like it. But hey, if you got to get around to reading those books at some point. That's a good tip. That's a good. I
Someday,
think there's plenty of
right?
authors out there that would apply to.
Maybe the toddler has to read one of the books before it gets to buy a new one.
Exactly.
Toddler needs some rules.
Excellent rule. An excellent
yes.
rule.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Right. Now, when you buy a book on craft or something, do you like? I don't know what your process is. Like, are you taking notes, or is it usually something like directly relevant to like what you're currently writing, or is it more like generic?
It's usually because there's a point in the craft that I wanted to dive in more when I'm during my editing process, and I'll go look on Amazon and find something that looks like it's talking about what I need, and then yeah.
Cool. Kelly, you're up next.
Yes.
What do we got?
Okay, so mine today is a BookFunnel helpful tip about formatting. One of the things that we see come through the queue quite a bit will be an author saying, I put my book on my Kindle device and there's no cover. Why? I put it up in BookFunnel, it's there. Why aren't you putting my cover onto my device? And we need to talk about embedded covers. So embedding your cover is in your formatting software, whatever formatting software you're using, if it's Vellum or Atticus, whatever. If you are when you create your file, you need to make sure that that cover is embedded in the file itself, because that is what shows when it transfers over to Apple Books or Kindle or whatever it is. The cover that you put into BookFunnel is for our landing pages. So if you change your cover, which happens all the time, we'll have a reader go, I got a different book than I was expecting. Because what's happening is on the inside of the cover is the old cover, it stays because it's still in the file. So if you change your cover, you have to change your cover in both places, both on the BookFunnel, in BookFunnel, and then actually within the files itself. So we get that a lot. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to bring it up because that's a big one.
That's a good one. And the readers are really, there have been times, sometimes an author will update a cover and readers will be confused because it's like a totally different looking cover, even though it's like the same title. But there have been times where the embedded cover is a completely different book, where it looks like the author may have like duplicated the book file to create a new project and left that embedded cover from the old one or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's what happens is like you can duplicate it so that all your back matter and your front matter are all similar, and you just make those changes and they don't always see, especially like at Vellum, you actually have to go to a specific place in Vellum to see your embedded cover.
It's in a separate
and if
spot.
you're not thinking about it, you might just leave your old cover in there. Yeah.
And this has implications outside of BookFunnel too, because if you have that file embedded and then you upload that to Amazon, the same sort of thing is going to, at least in the interior content of the book, is going to potentially happen. Well, no, that's
same
a good
with
one.
Apple Books, and that's how what's going to populate in your library. So
So my tip for today is around plotting and outlining. When you are plotting a story, the idea is that you can reduce all of the events and the plot points down into sentences where plot event happens because of, or but plot event happens, right? And so what you want is to be like, this event happens and therefore this happens, or this event happened, but this also happened, or this complicated things. What you don't want to have is this happens and then this happens and then this happens and then this happens and then this happens. Because those events now they're not connected. And so I think beginners make a mistake when they're plotting or writing an outline for their book is, well, this thing is going to happen, and then this thing is going to happen, and then this thing is going to happen. No, you have to go back and say, okay, this happens because this happened. And if you can't connect those two things, and you have work to do, at least hopefully you're at the outlining stage. Hopefully it's not like your first draft and you're realizing that there's a massive hole and you have these plot elements that aren't connected to anything and they're just hanging there in the open, right? So that's my tip. And I can't claim credit for this one. This one has been out there, but it's something I recently stumbled upon. And I think that just makes the whole outlining and plotting can be a very daunting process too, especially for somebody who's a pantser and you're just used to just kind of going without much of an outline. I think if you can at least connect the plot points and the events in a causal fashion, so cause and effect, the A causes B, I think you're setting yourself up for more success there when you're actually telling the story, because all the stuff that happens will not only logically make sense, but it's going to be connected. There's going to be like the reason why the final confrontation happens at the end is very clear. You could walk it back to the very beginning, and that's not only logical, it's satisfying. So there's my tip for today.
I think that's such a great tip because I think it will help avoid the problem I see. I think especially in movie and TV writing, probably mostly in series TV writing, is that they get addicted to the plot and then force their characters into it instead of having the characters drive the action. I have actually never heard specifically talking about make sure you have a causal plot outline, but I think that'll help when you're then writing it to help the characters drive the action instead of the other way around.
I tend to be, this is, so to kind of go back here a little bit, my editor had given some feedback because there was a project I was working on with Damon, the founder of BookFunnel. We co-wrote some books together at one point in time. And we got feedback from our editor on it. And what he said was that Jack is really good at world building and like the logic behind things. Damon is really good at like the story. And it was one of those times where like your parents tell you, that, oh, your brother's better at that than you are. And you have to take a moment to not just take offense to it and be like, okay, let me take that and internalize like what I need to do to get better, and realizing that, yes, I can think logically about a world like, oh, well, there's no gravity, so it wouldn't make sense for them to do this. Right? That makes sense to me. But the story elements I usually try to tie them together logically. The problem is when you just use logic, the plot can sometimes lack a little bit of like feeling, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
This tip, when I heard about this, like, okay, the logical part of my brain latches onto that and really likes it, but then I see how that creates the emotional satisfaction that I was looking to create. So that's why I think I latched onto it, because it already jived with my personality, and it's getting me that result that that way I can live up to my editor's hopes for me.
Hopes and dreams.
Yeah,
Hopes and dreams of your editor.
I have a tip as well.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
have some tips. I'm the guy at WrittenWell who looks over all the business charts because I'm a nerd. So I've been tracking, I track all the genres and everything. And so I just wanted to talk about, my 3 tips are 3 genres that I think are both doing very well right now, or really good genres. If we're talking about writing to market later, it'll be good too. So the big one right now is actually dark fantasy romance. I mean, it's well known already that romance makes all the money in self-publishing.
Yeah.
Think something when you run the numbers. It's been a while since I did them, but like 10% of all the Kindle books on Amazon are self-published romance.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a huge market share of both self-publishing, but also Amazon itself. But dark fantasy romance has exploded over the last 3-4 months and has really taken over the dark fantasy genre. It's a real bad time to write dark fantasy with no romance elements. But if you're writing romance, it's got even less big publisher interference than basic romance. You track that and the number of big publishers that are doing it to kind of see how much indies have a chance. And romance has a really low number of that to begin with, but dark fantasy romance is even lower than that, which is always what I'm looking for in romance. If you're going to write romance, don't write in a romance genre that has a higher publisher interference than the standard one. But if you're not writing romance, the 2 other things I like, sword and sorcery, which is a subgenre. It's a weird one to trying to define, but if you can get one that fits in there, that's one that's been growing exponentially for a year. Really, I've been tracking it for a year and been high on it since the beginning. And then the other one I like just for kind of the ease of writing, so it can be a very comfortable genre to write in. It's not a big money maker, but it's got a very long tail as far as where you can make money and how steady you can make money, which is cozy mysteries.
Yes.
Which are fun to write. They have the kind of right kind of formulaicness to make them easy to complete, but there's a lot of room for creativity in the characters and the crimes to really engage you. And they're just a really steady seller. They had a bit of a heyday and have come back to the pack, but they didn't. They just came back to where they were chugging along fine before.
Right.
So those are my 3 genre tips.
Yeah, it's interesting that you point out the traditional publishing interference aspect of things. And last week, in fact, we had Mal Cooper on the podcast.
Mal Cooper.
And one of the things that came up was just that I think it was a statistic that since 2016, more books have been written and published than in the entire history of humanity prior to that. And just that going forward, if you're writing a book and publishing it, however you're publishing it, really, you now have to stand out from the crowd. And I think to connect at this point, if you can find a genre or niche where there is less traditional publishing interference, you have a better chance, I guess I would say.
Yep. It's a balance in everything, because you're also looking at what you're trying to accomplish and what your chances of it are. Are you looking to make steady money? Are you looking for a big splash? Are you looking for the possibility of huge money? And what are you willing to give up to do that? And what are you able to do? You mentioned Becca's Syme. I thought she said Syme.
I think Syme, yeah.
Becca Syme. Saw her speak a couple of years ago. It was very inspiring, talking about the different paths to success and how many of them they are and the differences in them. Because, we want to talk about writing the market today. I mean, there's no easy way to self-publishing success, but there are simpler ways. And probably the simplest way is to write a lot of books and write them to market. Write quickly, write short if the market can take it, and write to market. But the fact is, not everyone can do that. It's not easiest. I call it fire hosing. Not everyone can fire hose out a book every 2 weeks, every month, continually. Not everyone can do it. If you can't do it, there's no shame in it, and doesn't mean you can't succeed, but you have to do it another way, and you have to not feel bad about the fact that you can't write fast. I can improve anybody's writing speed. There are ways to do that, but there's everyone has their own kind of rev governor that they're going to hit a hard stop at some point. Writing is a muscle, and the more you work it out. But if you're 125 flyweight writer, you can be the top of the flyweights and be the absolute champion, and maybe that's 1,000 words a day. And if you're a heavyweight, you've got a higher cap. It's just it's how we're built.
Exactly. So actually, this is a good segue to our main topic, which is writing to market in general. Thinking back when we met in Vegas, I remember I met you and Chris at Vegas.
Yep.
Right? Yep. And the one thing that kept coming up, and I think this is related here, was that authors, because I was doing one-on-ones with authors there at Vegas and was talking to them about self-publishing, where they were at. I ran into a lot of authors who were writing standalones. One in particular, he had written a standalone in one genre, and then another standalone in a second genre, and then one in a third genre. And they were
not rich.
really related. And this is maybe runs parallel to the conversation about writing to market. But the idea that you need to kind of pick a lane, you need to, whether it's one of those 3 genres you just mentioned, or maybe you really have a passion for a different genre, right? I write primarily space opera. And so I know that genre is, it has its own, its own ecosystem that's going on right now, but maybe I'm really devoted to that one and spending my time and focusing on that. When you talk to authors or you see where authors are, especially when they're getting started, I imagine that's fairly common. Authors have they've written a standalone, or they're maybe dabbling in different genres and they haven't really picked a lane to kind of just focus on.
So dealing with the baby authors, which I say with all affection, we've all been there ourselves. You need to do some realistic expectation setting, goal setting, and talk about the realities of the business. But also, it's an artistic pursuit. So you always have to balance the business side of it with the artistic side of it. because you're not just dealing with a get a job, work hard, forget about it at the end of your day. It's, often it is an all-consuming passion, and often it is something that someone is going to do their whole life regardless of success.
Yeah.
I grew up around writers. My mother's a writer. My grandfather was a writer. My sister's a writer. All my friends, both, out here and back where I grew up, are all writers. So I really know the type. So it's a balance. And so when you talk to them about, say, standalones, you can say there's a gal in my writers group, Kelly Barnhill, and writes only standalones, but she's traditionally published. And I asked her at a talk once, I said, you talk about how you're kind of between genres, you're part fantasy, part YA, part literary, and you only write standalones. I said, why do you hate your publishers so bad? But again, become very successful doing this but she's definitely an outlier. But again, it is a path to success. You can say it's not impossible to write standalones in a bunch of different genres and be successful. However, it is highly unlikely. It's a lottery ticket chance. The reason you want to write in a series is pure mathematics. It is purely so that your advertising dollars make sense. You cannot run a profitable advertising campaign on a standalone novel. You cannot charge enough to justify those things. Mm-hmm. You can often do it in nonfiction because you can charge more for a nonfiction if it's what I call instructionals. I split nonfiction up into informational and instructional. So like histories, memoirs, stuff like that is informational. Instructionals is our how-tos, but it also includes like self-help stuff and, so all that. And instructional, people are asking the question, want an answer, like the writing books you're talking about. You're very easily to put in your search term and find what you want. And right. Anytime that is the case, that means advertising dollars can be spent very effectively. But novels are so much more amorphous. There's more of them out there. People aren't asking a specific question. They're just like typing in, how about these vibes? And you go, I don't know, I have these vibes. Maybe they match. So you have to spread a wider net. And so that's just math. But then, the different genres, if you can write quickly, absolutely. Write in different genres, write 3 books in each one. For some people, that's less than a year's work. 9 books, 3 different things, advertise them, boom, which one hits? Right. My business partner talks about the entrepreneurial approach to authorship. Both of us have freelanced in a lot of different things. And he talks about once you get something that hits, you do 10 iterations of that. And you pick the one that hits harder than that. You do 10 until you've purified it down to your purest best-selling brand, and you go from there. Yep. What I've had to talk to him about is how hard it is for most authors to do that. And if we want to switch right into writing to market, that's the other thing is writing to market doesn't mean you have to look at all the markets and pick the most profitable one. It means you have to look at all the markets that you're capable of and would enjoy writing and try and pick the best one that's for you, both emotionally, financially, and psychologically to write. It all combines into one. It's not, you can't just write for the money. I mean, you can, James Patterson will give me 200 million reasons a year why you can write just for the money, but most people can't.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting, you're the second person in 2 podcasts to say that exact same thing about it's real hard to put an ad to one book if you've only got one book and it's a standalone. It's so hard. Because we talked about that actually last week with Mal, which was, you need to actually have some sort of backlist in order to put your readers to, in order to make your ads profitable, which I think is absolutely correct. Kind of circling back to, writing to market. I'm a slower writer. It's not something, I'm not one that can. It's not that I don't have it in me to sit and do it. It's that I don't always have time, especially now working full time. A lot of us have other jobs. For slower writers, how do you anticipate the market when you look at that big, broad, scheme of things? You're looking at Amazon, you're looking at the top 100s, and you're trying to gauge, as like the 3 that you brought up earlier. How do you know if you're going to be able to write it in time for that to happen? What advice do you have for slower writers that still want to do it?
I have several things to say for slow writers. First of all, is understand the concept of a null variable. if you truly have no idea when you're going to come out with something, then don't bother trying to time the markets. And you can just take that out of your consideration at all. Now it no longer matters, and go with the other stuff.
So can I, I'm sorry for interrupting. Do you
That's all right.
mean focus on more evergreen content, what you would consider evergreen in your niche?
No, what I mean is, I'm not even talking about picking the market yet. I'm talking about stop worrying about hitting an upswing in a market. Stop worrying about timing those releases. I got other advice on timing the releases, but it's, don't worry about, I'm looking at this trend, but I can't write it in time for it to hit, so I'm really disappointed. Should I write it anyway? Don't beat yourself up about that. Write the stuff you like, write it well, and when it's ready to go, put it out there in the best way possible. I mean, everything that we teach you about launching books and about advertising books and promoting books, it all works, whether the market is selling 200 books a day or 2 million books a day. It all works on some level. And if you can't time it, don't worry about that.
Right.
One of the best pieces of advice, I'm a slow writer myself. I came out of traditional publishing first, and I've sped stuff up, but the most I've ever come out with is 3 books in 1 year. And that's not self-publishing speed. The best advice I got was from a guy named Blaze Ward, who also does space opera, and he's another instructor at the site, and he puts out a book a month. And has done so every month for 6 years now. And additionally he does all kinds of other stuff as well. He's the one who always says writing is a muscle. If you work it out, it'll get stronger.
Right.
But his advice for slower writers is, if you can't write quickly, write it consistently. If you only come out with 2 books a year, have like a summer release and a winter release, so that your fans know, it's June, the next Emma Allison book should be coming out soon, and they go look for it. December, Emma always comes out with a Christmas book. So if you're writing 2 books a year, so what you're doing, you're part of promoting is training your audience to come look for you at the right time,
Right.
and be excited about that. Get people to sign up for your Amazon author page so that Amazon is sending out alerts.
Right.
And the other thing I wanted to double back to on the advertising is, remember, you cannot profitably advertise a standalone novel. But the other caveat is, profitability is not always going to be your aim in advertising. Even when they say, well, obviously not if you're selling that first book for 99 cents, you're going to make money on the last bit. But it might not even be that. The best thing that stuff like Amazon advertising is for discoverability. Most of us come from a very slim audience background, and you're trying to build an audience, you're trying to build a long-term audience. You might not want to try so hard for profitability on your very first series of books. You're looking for discoverability for the next series of books, for the series, for a career. So selling 10 books profitably is not as long-term profitable as selling 100 books unprofitably.
Yeah.
If you could gain, even if you're gaining 20% long-term fans, you're getting 20 long-term fans instead of 2.
Yeah.
So even if you're losing money, some of us don't have the money to lose. So again, it's all these considerations that go into it that are personal to you. I have a whole series of books out called How to Write Fantasy Novels, and it's a 5-book series. Books 4 and 5 are on publishing, both traditional and self-publishing. And what I talk about in the first one is what will make you happy in your publishing career. Because if it's money, you want to go to self-publishing because you have a much better shot at making a living. But you don't get the accolades, you don't get reviewed in Locus and this other stuff, And some people go for the wrong thing and then are miserable and don't know why. I know a lot of very happy traditional authors who have a day job and make on average $8,000 a year. And I know some very miserable traditional authors doing the exact same thing. Same with self-published authors. I know self-published authors who are making good living and are burning out. And I know self-publishing authors who absolutely love it and think it's the greatest thing and think that traditional authors are idiots. I mean, so it's just the whole spread. I have no I got no dog in your fight. You have to figure out what was going to make you happy.
Exactly. To kind of tie this back around too to what Kelly was saying, I think if you are a slow writer, like you said, you're building something, and if you're like, maybe you're taking a loss right now, but if you continue to release on a regular basis and you continue to build your audience, there comes a time where you don't just have 1 or 2 books out. You fast forward, if you stay consistent for 5, 10 years, now you've got 20 books out there. Now you've gotten there eventually. And then you can't predict the market. So write what you enjoy, but the market will sometimes come around and find you as well.
Yes.
And the beauty
grunge rock found me in the 90s, and I had been not combing my long hair and wearing flannel for years before that. And then all of a sudden I was trendy and hip. Yeah. I was like, wow, I've been playing loud music with long tangled hair, and all of a sudden I'm huge.
Right? Exactly.
That's right. Did not last long, but it's
hey. So because if you chase the market, write something you enjoy. And you never know, it might come around and find you. And I think if you market it well, I think you'll be fine.
I always say, be realistic, and don't be jealous. Because in that 10 years, it took you to write those 20 books. Maybe your friend has written 200.
Sure.
But you're not them. You're yourself. Do your own thing, be happy, and be realistic.
Right.
But I would like to talk about just generally writing to market, because I think it's like one of the most both mysterious and misunderstood concepts out there. Because you go on Reddit and people are saying, don't write for market, you'll just hate it. And I'm like, maybe you're just writing to market the wrong way.
Right. So because I can sympathize with that, because there's definitely my first million or so words were written in a project that I started when I was 15 years old, a mishmash of genres that did not belong together, right? Some gambling thing, right? I have dreams of revisiting that one day and polishing it up just so I can, put it out there. But that's kind of neither here nor there. So
the Trump novel.
Yeah. So exactly. So what's the main misconception then? When you say write to market and somebody goes, what is the main misconception there or the thing that they're not seeing, the thing that they're missing?
There's a couple things. First of all, writing to market is a twofold process. It's both finding a market, profitable market, and then writing books in that market that market will like. And most people miss one or the other of those things. And the most common one is like, I wrote to market, I hated it, and it didn't sell. And then you hear them talk about the book, and they say, well, you researched what market was good, and then wrote a book that no one in that market would like. You ignored the tropes. You used a couple of cliches thinking they were tropes. You didn't give anyone the ending they thought, and you didn't revolutionize the genre. A writing market is not looking to revolutionize a genre. You're looking to write books in it that people like. So that's one of the common failures. And the other thing is, like we talked about before, the restrictions that you should place on yourself when writing to market. Romance is easily the most money-making market out there for a self-published author. It's not close. It is once again, I shouldn't say easiest. It is the simplest path to success. However, I am not a romance reader. I don't read romance. I wouldn't dare trying to write romance because I know nothing about the genre. I mean, I know plenty about it. I don't know enough about it to write it well. You should love the genre you write in. So if you only love one genre, then only do the second half of writing to market. You've already found the market, no matter how successful it is. I mean, I wouldn't tell a single person to write cyberpunk right now. It's a genre that's just been in horrible decline. Sure, if William Gibson whenever he writes one, it has a nice jump, but then it goes back, and so the top 30 books in cyberpunk sell 100 books a month. I mean, it's really bad. So, but if that's the only genre you love, and that's the only one you want to write, and the only thing you read, well, then guess what? You're a cyberpunk writer.
Yeah.
Get after it. and, and maybe you can revive it with your sheer joy of writing the stuff. But if you're a cyberpunk writer and that's all you write, and you could go to I should write to market, and you research everything, and like I said, you went, well, dark fantasy romance is hot, I'm going to write that. It's not going to work.
Right. No, it's interesting to point that out, because I think the common objection to writing to market is just that, well, I want to write what I enjoy.
Then do it.
Then exactly.
And if you enjoy, the beauty of it is most writers read a wide variety of genres. Most of us are voracious readers, through a wide. So research all the ones that you like. Start by saying, here's the 12 genres that I think I both could and would enjoy writing. My whole thing about writing, it's the one artistic pursuit that is entirely cerebral. It's different from the other ones, and I've done many of the other ones, and there's generally a physical attribute to all of those. So, as a musician, I have played in just about every genre of music, and some of them I don't particularly enjoy, but the physical aspect of it doesn't change. Mm-hmm. So I can learn the techniques of that and do it and be fine, because I'm good on my instrument. I have technical proficiency. Technical proficiency in writing is very amorphous. The closest we get as far as just physicality is who can type the fastest. And that can be a factor, but it's not much of one. So the importance of liking the genre isn't just about understanding the tropes from the inside, having them naturally within you, but it's a big part of it. But it's also that writing is really hard to do when you don't enjoy it, because it's all in your head. You can't shut off your head. I mean, I worked in a warehouse for 5 years, and I loved it because I shut off my head and thought about every stuff and just was physical every day. I lost 40 pounds. I plotted books while I was doing it. I was great. You can't do that with writing. You can't do it when you don't enjoy it, because, doing stuff you don't enjoy, part of that is shutting off your brain. That's why we can work jobs we don't like, because we're unattached to them. We don't care. You have to care about your writing, or you can't do it. That's my rant.
Can I bring a what if into the writing the market?
Okay.
So dark fantasy romance, that's what I write. That's what I devour as a reader.
Fantastic.
I am slightly off market, because in fantasy romance and dark fantasy romance, the heroines tend to be my daughter's age, 21, blonde, perky, but my heroines are usually 35 and up, women of color, most often mothers. We see. Now, would you say that's an example where you would bite the bullet and just shit a little bit, or dig down into your niche?
My personal opinion, which is not currently backed up with actual research, but it's just a feel for things, is that I would stick with what you do best for a couple of reasons. What we've been talking about, doing what you love, you're going to write better stuff like that. But also talking about the 28 million books that are coming out, you still have to stand out. So you want to write within the field, but you still need something that makes you stand out. So if you think that, your different type of character might actually give you a boost and let you stand out from the field. But if you write fast enough, I would do both. I would try a shift in the series, because my business partner would say the opposite thing. He said, no, you're already partway there with the love of the thing. Dive into a series with a 21-year-old white girl and make it happen. Get 3, 4, 5 of those out before the thing dies. But I mean, he's like he's a pure right to market guy. And he could actually look at, 90% of the things and go, oh, this one looks like it's trending. I'm going to pop out a bunch of those.
Uh-huh.
So again, there's no easy or even right answers in any of this, which is also a hard thing for people to get their heads around when they come to, part of what you're selling when you're running an educational site, like I am, WrittenWell.com. We haven't mentioned that in a while. Part of what you're selling is the secret. Here's the secret to success. And the secret to success, but the secret to success is the same as in any other part of life. Love what you do, work really hard at it, do everything you can, and hope for the best. You know?
Well, I think part of, we've talked about like the shift in the market, or, the market, people are trying to write to the market and they see dark fantasy romance and they go, "Ooh, pretty. I'm going to do that." Even though I don't read it and I don't want it, but I'm going to make it different. I'm going to be the one that I'm going to not give it a happily ever after. You see these arguments happening in the community where they're like, "But my protagonist is going to die."
Yeah.
And you're like,
and
well,
why didn't that work? I revolutionized the no one wanted this revolution.
I made it different. I made it, which, like you're saying, I think what Emma's going for with, like, the protagonists are older, women of color, they have children. Like, there's a market of women who who also cannot read those same, 20, 18-year-olds having a romance, because it just is not where we are in our lives anymore. And so that market exists for sure. Whereas maybe doing something that goes completely against the idea of the drama.
Right.
Yeah. Like,
I would say the characters of early days white girls is a trend, not a trope.
Gotcha.
So I think, your older women, I mean, and frankly, older women are already the audience. And older women of color are definitely an underserved audience. So also, I think you have a social media pitch with that not on Twitter, because it's a trash fire, but on Blue Sky.
Okay.
There's a great writers communities and underserved, underprivileged communities on Blue Sky. So you have and this is, I get in trouble for talking just the business side of things and looking at things very analytically like that. But you have a good social media pitch with that. And I think
I was talking to
a
friend about that, and she was saying pretty much the same thing you're saying. She's like, you keep downplaying your characters' characteristics and chasing this other niche, and instead leave them alone.
Yeah.
The toddler to bed.
Right. If you're gonna chase the other niche, you have to do it whole hog. You can't write your older character and then market it like it's a younger character.
And that's what I've been doing for years.
Don't do that.
She's 35.
You push it. I have a fantasy series where the main character starts in his 40s, and by the third book, is a grandfather. And so, but that part of the marketing is for older heroes. That's one of the thrusts of the marketing. You have to push what's different.
Well, I guess it's that embracing that trend, right? That you were saying, it's a trend.
Yeah.
The trend.
Well,
that you're trying to
what
make.
I'm saying is, the older character is not going against a trope of the genre. There's no romance trope that the main female character has to be young. There's a lot of there's huge ones for older women. They're actually very popular because the readership is generally the market share of 30 plus women in romance is gigantic. So the audience is already there and probably underserved that character. And so that's why I say it's a trend. It's not really a feature of the genre. The tropes of the genre is the the happily ever after, the will they, won't they, even though we know they will. The difference between, romance and erotica is romance, it's will they, won't they, we know they will. And erotica, it's they will and they already did. And they're going to do it again and again with other people. That's, both of them, we know they will, but we pretend we don't know in romance.
It's interesting to me bringing up this topic of like the trope versus the trend, and maybe even to look at it through a different lens is like the trope versus maybe like the twist. So the trope is the elements of the story that are typical for that genre, but then there's always something like where you can like put a little twist on something. And so imagine a police drama where one of the characters is a crime scene investigator who specializes in like blood specifically. Oh, and he happens to be a serial killer. Right.
Right.
Dexter, for those who don't know.
Yeah.
It's the you put on the trope. as like, imagine Star Trek with, a captain who just happens to be a kleptomaniac. That one might be out of there, way out in left field. But the moment I give you that twist, you're like, that there's huge implications just from a storytelling perspective that are interesting to me. But and not to say that, that's the perfect example here, but just like how you can put a twist on a genre or a character or a trope, I think the same thing is true. Like if the trend is one thing, that doesn't mean that you can't write with, like you said, an older female lead or have the female lead be a person of color. I think you can absolutely do that. And there's a market there for it. Might be harder to, it might seem harder, and Adam, tell you if this checks out, but if like you've written to market, but you're not like 100% on that trend exactly, it might seem harder to get an audience, but that's just because everybody's hopping on the bandwagon over there. You just need to stay the course and focus on what you enjoy writing. Does that check out?
Yep. So first of all, for me, tropes, there's also levels of tropes, but the big tropes are the ones that without them, it's no longer that genre.
Yeah.
Without the happily ever after, you've generally written something literary or a tragedy or, a tragic comedy, whatever it is. It's no longer romance.
Uh-huh.
If your thriller doesn't have a ticking clock, you've written a mystery. Those tropes, those are ones that it's even very difficult to twist. Now that there are other ones that are still tropes that then you can twist for effect, but the reader has to know that you know the trope and are doing it intentionally, which is a very difficult thing, but it comes from having that deep knowledge of the genre. If you're just going in to say, I changed the genre, you don't want to change the genre. You want to work within this. And people who tell you can't be creative with those kind of limits have never written a haiku.
Yeah, that's true.
You can have the tightest restrictions in the world and be immensely creative. So that's and writing within Tropes is nowhere near trying to write a haiku that's good. I mean, it's way more fun. It's way easier.
Now, to kind of transition us here a little bit. So ideally, you would identify the tropes. First of all, you would know ahead of time before you even plotted your novel, right? What tropes you want to hit on, what genre you want to be in, like where are the lines that you need to color within. But to talk it, because I know part of the conversation we wanted to have a little bit today was on editing. But if you get to that point where now you're going through the editing process and maybe you're working with an editor, right? I know self-editing is one thing that you guys at WrittenWell do talk to folks about.
Mm-hmm.
We can get to that, but you're going through the editing process. Hopefully you're catching those issues there so that you can fix them before you release, I imagine, because you don't want to wind up releasing and then having to go back and make changes later, and that can be a whole debacle. So, but what are the best ways to identify that you are hitting those tropes when you're going through the editing process? So you're kind of past that first stage, you've written your first draft. Where do you see people, like, is that something you really need to work with a literary editor on? Or you need to have somebody reading the book? Or is it something that you can identify yourself there?
Okay, I have a multi-tiered answer to this one. So first of all, at WrittenWell, we actually have genre guides. One of the things we saw right away when we were planning this was that no one was really talking about the differences between genres, not just in writing them, but in marketing them, in publishing them, in cover design. All this, everything changes from market, dependent on genre. So we actually have genre guides for all the major genres and most of the subgenres. Some are so close or to the original one, there's just some notes, but a lot of them have full guides. And part of what we have is both, not just that we have like a lot of the common tropes, but we also have the must-haves. So those are like your top tier tropes. So part of what we hope people are doing is when you're writing with these within these genres is you're reading the genre guides, you're reading within the genre, both the current stuff and the stuff that's built up to that. So you get this interior knowledge of what's expected, of what makes the genre. So the tropes are already there. But then for me personally, what I like to say is I plan for plot write for character, and rewrite for theme. But theme can also include the tropes. So what you don't want to necessarily interrupt your flow of first drafting to go, am I really hitting this trope hard enough? Is this, you want to get through that first draft. When you're editing, then you want to go, okay, what is this book really about? What's the theme? And what is, if I'm writing to market, what are the major tropes in here? How can I make them more evident? How can I punch them up? I do a very extensive editing process, and I got a whole course that I wrote on writing the novel. That's up, one of the courses at WrittenWell, and it has a third part of that course is all about rewriting and doing multiple passes. I'm all about targeted passes. So you're not just reading your book and creating mistakes. I'll do things like, I don't have to do them as much as I used to, but early in my career, I always had to do a smell pass.
Yes.
Because it was one of the senses I always forgot. So I go through and I'd be like, it's been a couple pages since another few pages and my characters no longer have noses. So what does it smell like here? And you can get some great metaphors with smells. So it's great. And it can be, and I also like to say anything you could put in a book should be character defining. So how people experience every one of their senses tells the reader something about their character. But that's a big digression. But as far as, when you do a targeted pass, going, I am looking to make sure that we were talking about the happily ever after. That's not as much. Let's talk about, a lot of tropes sometimes are character types. So if you're doing epic fantasy, there are some fairly well-defined character archetypes. They're well-defined enough. Those are ones that you can twist really well. The dwarf who's actually gives to charity. The hobbit who's clumsy and can't sneak anywhere. Those are, those ones are not so essential, but you have to do it. No, if you make a dwarf who gives to charity, that's funny because everyone thinks of them as greedy, which I think of as probably came about as from anti-Semitism, but it moved on from there. So, but another whole thing. But those tropes you can play with. But if you're playing with those, you're like, okay, do I have those tropes in there? Do I have any of these tropes that are now offensive to the readers? Maybe. Have I twisted one too hard so that readers are turning off? And that's, I think, just having targeted passes helps you find that yourself.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, for romance, I always have an emotion pass where I'm like, because my drafting is very dead writing. It's very, there's not a ton of thought or it's just getting it through the scene. It's more action based. And then having an emotion edit has me go back and be like, what would they feel? What would that? And I do it like a 5 senses check every once in a while and go like, okay, well, what would make sense here? Or standing by the wharf, it smells like the sea or something like that, like that sort of pass, so that I'm adding those details in and it makes it. But I think sometimes it's subjective to the person and the writer that you are, what I'm going to have to come back here and make sure that I make these characters have some depth because they don't when they start off.
One of the things with developmental editors is if you're hiring a developmental editor, that doesn't necessarily mean you're always going to need one. Yes. Listen to what they say. I mean, my smell passes came about because someone told me you don't have enough smells in your book. And I'm like, damn it, you're right. And so then I added that to my checklist of passes I do. I find that the thing that I most commonly tell more beginner writers when I'm editing their stuff or critiquing it is that you have told me what happened. You have showed me what happens. This is another misunderstood thing is show, don't tell. Because then people show you what happens. And he said, okay, you've shown me what happens, but I have no idea about how the character is experiencing it. And that's the interesting part of reading. We read to get into other characters' heads. Give me more interior dialogue. Don't tell me they got stabbed. Tell me how it feels to get stabbed. Tell me if they're in a fight. Tell me how chaotic it is to them. If you've ever been in a fight, it is a chaotic thing unless you're a trained fighter. Listen to a trained fighter describe a fight is very different from your buddy who got in a scrap at the bowling alley's experience of a fight. But if you just describe the fight, we have no idea whether the character is a bowling alley scrapper or an MMA fighter, a warrior, a fantasy warrior, or a fantasy peasant who's scrabbling in the mud with someone else. So tell me how they're feeling about it in real time. What is going on in their head as all this stuff happens? And I do that myself too, where I'll go, oh, look at this scene where I just described what happened. Boring. So boring.
It's kind of like, so I've done martial arts my whole life. Excuse me. Starting from the age of 5, Taekwondo, Hapkido, some Russian stuff, a whole very eclectic background. Point being, when I watch movies, they're all ruined for me because that's how fights are. I've sparred. I fought. I remember being like 12 years old and being in a judo tournament, and I was big for my age. So I got thrown into a higher weight division. I think I was like a green belt or a blue belt at the time. And the other kid was a brown belt. And he literally, the referee says, Hajime, like begin. And he walks up to me, claps his hands, grabs me by the gi and flips me over his hip. It's done. And it was over. That's the type of thing that you don't know until you've experienced it. And so, yes, whenever I watch movies, it's like they're ruined for me because the fights are just so unrealistic. But I think when you're writing, you need to understand that there's things you don't know and there's things you haven't experienced. And so, like you said, like there's a place for maybe trying to experience that stuff, or at the very least, like consult the experts, consult somebody who's like gone through this, who's experienced this, who's done this. What is it like to be in that situation?
That's why I have 6 books on writing fight scenes, Jack.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Here's the thing. Some of my favorite fight scenes are written by martial arts practitioners, and some of my least favorite fight scenes are also written by martial arts practitioners. It's still, you still have to write the scene, and you still have to understand how people experience it, both the characters and the reader. My first solo novel I ever wrote had a drug-addicted guitar player main character, a self-obsessed drug-addicted main character, which people said was autobiographical, but they don't know what they're talking about. So, but one of the things I did, so there were a lot of music scenes in it, and I let myself go, knowing this was happening during the drafting process. I just let myself go because it was a confidence building thing. Anytime I was feeling more like a baby writer, I'd write a complicated music scene because I knew that was all absolutely correct. And then, even before I sent it to the editor, because I knew what they would say, I cut about half of those, and I cut them down, and I lost half the jargon. And I just made it more. And then when it came back from my editor, he wanted even another half of that gone. And I cut it down even more because the danger of being too far inside is you're too far inside. And only you now understand that, Sometimes martial arts practitioners write a fight scene that only high-level martial arts practitioners are going to understand. And the rest of us are like, did he punch him?
Yes.
Hey, honey, come read this. Did someone get punched? I'm not sure. I think he's on the ground now, so I'm almost sure.
No, I hear you. I've done the same thing with fight scenes and realized that's only entertaining to me. And
I love it, which means I need to rewrite it.
And I think, has anyone ever done what I do sometimes and hunted down a good fight scene in your genre, on TV, and then sat there and tried to describe it move by move and hope that's not plagiarism or copyright violation?
Actually, that's a great exercise. Describing stuff you see, anything. I was having trouble with descriptions early on. And so when I went for a walk, I would look a bit at a building and specifically think to myself, how would I describe that building? How would I describe this street? How would I describe this lake? Because you actually need practice doing that, because there's a difference between writing and writing what you see. And there's also a difference in writing what you see is not necessarily going to make for good fiction.
Right.
Yeah.
However, it's not never writing what you see is also not going to make for good fiction.
Right.
There's a mix of how would I describe this accurately? How would I describe this poetically? How would I describe this from a person who had never seen this before? How would I describe this to a person who walks by this every day? There's a different, how would I would describe this from a person who's depressed, who's happy, who's just broke up? It's a different description for anything. And that description, once again, is an opportunity to illuminate character. And characters are what makes writing interesting. When adults talk about the characters, now we get into the difference between YA and children's books. Children and YA talk about the plot. They talk about what happens. That's why your YA stuff is going to be, you want less, more action, more stuff happening, more plot. Yes, some character, but more plot. Kids are naturally empathetic. They don't need very much to jump into the mind of the character. Whether it's a person, as long as it's a person near their age, boom, they're all in. Adults need a lot more character to care. It's harder to kill our sense of disbelief.
Right.
Now, I want to jump back to what you said about layers, because I'm like you, I like to edit in multiple passes and pull out different things. What is your experience with yourself? When do you tell yourself enough is enough? Or do you just let it go to the end until you're like, I'm full now? Or is there a certain point you're like, I just got to cut it off? Best
way I have found, and I've only done this once so far because I'm a coward, but it really works. Set a release date. That cuts it right up. It's hard. As a traditional author, it's easy. You're done revising when your editor says it's done. And then it's perfect in every way. It cannot be improved, and it comes out and you spot a typo on page 3. But at least it's done. It's hard. It's hard. I don't believe people say, I can tell when a book or a story has been over workshop. No, they can't. They sense something's wrong with it, and then people said, well, I edited it, and they go, that's the problem. It's probably not the problem. I don't believe in over editing. Sometimes your focus can get too narrow. You need to take a break and look at it with fresh eyes. I like to read stuff chapter by chapter backwards. So I'll start with the last chapter. I actually catch more sequencing errors that way than because, we're Gestalt thinkers. We see patterns, we fix patterns that aren't there. So actually, if it's going in sequence, we don't see that we smudge over any sequence errors in our mind. When you're going backwards, you're like, wait a minute, that doesn't happen there.
It's like that. Yeah.
But it's hard to tell when it's done. Eventually, you just put it out there. I have a writers group, so they're very helpful. Having other people around you who you trust to tell you, you know what, it's perfect. Don't bother when anybody.
Away now,
yeah,
Adam.
exactly. Oops, I already submitted it. We had a couple of people in our writers group. She was writing, but she was depressed and her this is a great comeback story actually. Like many of us who started in the traditional world, she was a failed mid-list writer, and it's depressing to be a failed mid-list writer. And many of us failed before the real surge of self-publishing, and there was we saw no other outlets, and we just go, well, I guess I suck and nothing will ever be good again. And so she's a brilliant short story writer and novelist, and she was still writing but couldn't get herself to send stuff out. And so her friend, also in the writers group, said, just send it to me and I will send it out for you. I know all the markets, I will send it out. Okay, it won't do any good, my career is over, blah. But here it is. Sent it out, won a Hugo, wrote a novelization of it, won another Hugo, did the sequel, won a Hugo, huge career now, sells all the time. It's a great comeback story from just the absolute depths, but just, keep writing. Yeah. Keep sending stuff out. If you're self-published, keep putting books out. The more you put out, the better I always say the beauty of self-publishing is, not while you're building a solid career of just, the mid-list is sustainable in self-publishing. It's not sustainable in publishing because they don't want to sustain it. In mid-list, in the self-publishing, you're your own publishers, so you really want to sustain your main authors. So it's sustainable. But while you're doing this mid-list stuff, you're putting out books, you're making $2,000, $3,000 on every book you put out. Oh, if you're writing quick, that's a great self-publishing career. But that entire time, you're throwing a dart at the dartboard of mega hit. And the more darts I talked to a guy before it became Author Nation out at Vegas. I talked to a guy at the 20 Books. 1 year he was an older guy, had done like a 32 book series, kind of coming of age based on his own life. And it did fine because he had 32 books out. He did fine, right?
Huh.
The next year, I'm like, oh, hey, great to see you again. How you doing? He says, well, it's crazy. And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, I finished up my whole series and I thought maybe I'll write some historical fiction. So he wrote this 9th century British historical warrior thing. And it did like 6 figures in the first month it was out. And now he has this whole 6-figure series because the dart hit.
It's a lottery
Someone
ticket.
at Author Nation asked me if I was going to go gamble or do the slot machines. And I'm like, I'm trying to advertise dark fantasy romance on Facebook.
I
But
gamble
Facebook
plenty.
ads, I
Yeah.
already gamble.
I gamble plenty. It's fine. Facebook ads. Oh man, Facebook will spend your money. They don't
yeah.
care. I gotta twist and turn and swerve and do all sorts of crazy stuff to get Amazon to spend my money, my ad money. But Facebook was like, hey, remember $100? That's gone now. Like, it's day 2. What are you doing? We need more money. Okay, here's more money.
Right. So on this, an interesting thing here on writing to market, is one of the things that we wanted to discuss a little bit was the idea of authors are using AI now, right? And there's lots of ways that they can use AI, but there's this interesting connection here that I wanted to make. And so I'm going to lead off this topic and we can get to talking about AI, but I want to lead off with just a question, if you will, sort of what if. So if there are more authors using AI and AI can only essentially work with what is already out there, how can you write to market in that sense if you're relying 100% on AI? Because the market is oftentimes something kind of new. There might be some things that are like resurging, sure.
Right.
But AI can't predict that. So how would you be, if you were relying 100% on AI, right? How would you be able to write to market? And I'm teeing you up here on purpose.
Right. Well, I can tell you how to get rich using entirely AI writing. And it's quite simple, but it's a scam. It's against the terms of service of Amazon, and it is entirely immoral and unsustainable. And they're actually doing stuff to crack down on it because this was what people were doing. You put out 10,000 books. You have 20,000 sock puppets on KDP, and as soon as it hits, they start reading away. And they get as many hits and get paid before they get banned. And you do that with 10,000 books in a week. That's how they're doing it. Amazon actually did a remarkably good job of cutting down on the most of that with the simple expedient of saying you can only publish 3 books a day.
Right.
And there is no human that needs to publish more than 3 books a day. It's just not. It's not the case. So. Other than that, and we're talking to LLMs here, I have no problem with the AI assistance in checking grammar and stuff that can give suggestions that is easily rejectable. But for the actual writing, I mean, AI can't innovate. It can't track the, and like you said, it can't track the markets. It can't make a conscious decision of what tropes to twist. In fact, it's not going to twist any tropes at all. I suppose if you told it, it might, but I'm not sure it's going to do a good job with it. My business partner, who is not as anti-AI as I am, he did a whole social media post, which was hilarious, about him writing a standard fantasy using an LLM and just hilariously trying to drag it back on track. Like, I told you there's a fucking dragon. Why is there no dragon? Well, and it's just this whole thing. It's a whole thing. It was hilarious. But it's, and they've done studies, and the people using AIs are writing, worse and less stuff than the people using that. So what we were talking about before the thing started, there's a shift that a lot of people I've talked to, and I myself have felt after you've written around 1 million words, where you really feel like you've leveled up as an author. And you have a confidence in your writing, both in just the prose, as well as completing projects and adding in strange other characters that and plot lines that even without knowing yet, that they'll connect up at the end. And all this fun stuff that you can do with all this experience. And I'm like, why would you rob yourself of that?
Right.
Writers enjoy writing. We don't particularly like sitting down to write, but the writing is enjoyable. Like I said, you have to love it, or else why are you doing it? So,
Right.
you know, if you want to use AIs to get rich, you know, it's writing is not the way to do it. I'm
Right.
sorry to tell you that most writers
Right.
don't get rich. It's not a, you know,
Right.
try something else.
I think you could wind up. So I've played around with writing something with AI just to see what it was like, and it very quickly found that you have to guide it very heavily, and you essentially have to edit it just as much, if not more, than you would have to like your first draft. You can't just, it doesn't spit out a finished
Right.
product, right? And so maybe for the editors out there who aspire to be writing,
Yeah. If you love editing and hate writing, perhaps LLMs are for you. But that's
Right.
not how that's not how you're going to describe 99.9% of the writers out
Right.
there.
Yeah, and I think it would become a crutch if you relied on it way too heavily and you're actually aspiring to be a writer and you're not just trying to scam people. Like you have to like use AI you can use AI to analyze, to get suggestions, to even to like analyze a paragraph and suggest some alternatives. I know that there's some, and for some people that kind of crosses a line where they don't want to use anything that's been written by AI, but like not even a few word suggestions here or there. You know, do what you want to do out there is my opinion. But yeah, I think if you're
It's
having
basically a thesaurus at that point. I don't have a problem with that. If you're looking for, I wrote this. What are some alternate ways to say? Oh, I like that. That's a thesaurus.
How could I introduce more smells into this chapter? Right.
Right. Yeah. Would this be a good place for a smell? Yes, you stinky bastard.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing that I see it being actually useful for. I don't see like if you're writing your first draft with AI, I think it's a crutch, and you're going to wind up getting in a position where you're not developing your actual writing
You're
chops.
never going to get better as a writer. If you want to get better as a writer, then write. If you just want to and it's tricky because when you run up against the fact that the simplest way for self-publishing success is to write a lot of books quickly. However, here's the thing, and this can go right back to a pure mathematical reason for not using AI. And it's that when we talked about the advertising budget and you need to write in a series for your advertising money to work and be profitable. Well, that's because you can advertise the first book and then people will buy the next 6. However, if the first book sucks, no one's buying the next 6. So if AI writes you a whole bunch of sucky books, it's not helping that it did it in an afternoon because no one's going to read them. You need the scam of the Kindle Unlimited sock puppets to read the book, to get the read through, because no other humans are going to want to read this. So if you're writing AI for other AI or troll farms to read for you, I don't know what you're doing, but it's not being a writer. It's not writing.
Right. I've been seeing all these.
It's going to bring you neither riches nor happiness.
Yeah. No, I've been seeing that on Facebook for services that promise you can write your novel with AI. It's like, boy, like I wouldn't even like for fun maybe just to see what kind of silliness it spits out, but not for legitimately somebody you're aspiring.
Once again, people are looking for the secret to writing success. And the secret is both simple and complicated, because the secret is to work at it really hard and keep working at it. And within that, there are a lot of nuances and techniques and different stuff you can do. And the hard part about writing, in the end, you are not in control of your own success. In another job, if you were getting paid on output, you would know when I was working landscaping and I was filling flats of Pachysandra and I got paid by the flat, I knew that if I did X amount of flats, I got this much. In writing, you can write 10 books, and if no one likes them, you don't make any money, no matter how you advertise them, how you promote them. And they might be good books, and you might be a good writer, and they just don't hit. There's a cultural zeitgeist, and you don't always tap into it, which is why you can't be jealous when one of your friends hits into it, because you're not in final control. The better you are at it, the more entertaining your books, the better your books, the better chance you have. But there are great writers who never sell anything because sometimes people just don't like it. And it's a hard, hard truth.
Now we come to our story behind the story segment, where we talk about our guests and their backstory, what got them into publishing, maybe what they're currently working on. So, Adam, we know you have been in the traditional publishing sphere and you've done some self-publishing as well. So tell us, what's your origin story as an author?
My origin story. My mother is a famous children's book author named Jane Yolen. If you've had any of the How Do Dinosaurs Say Goodnight books, Owl Moon. Yeah. So that's my mom. So at, age 7 or 8, when you're keeping a little journal, a lot of kids did that. Mine would come back every morning, edited in red with a prompt for the next day's journal. So that's a very early education in writing, possibly a little Skinner-esque. So, and all her friends were writers and illustrators in Western Massachusetts. So I grew up around, Tommy DePaula and Eric Carle, Norton Juster, the Phantom Tool Booth guy, and all these people. I was just exposed to that a lot as a young man. And then my father was head of the computer science department eventually at UMass. So I came from a very academic background. So they were pretty disappointed when I dropped out of high school at 16 and moved out moved in with some speed freak bikers. Because I like to call myself the world's most disappointing child prodigy. At 12, I was nearly fluent in French and played the cello and was working on math theorems with my dad. But I had a major depression, anxiety attack disorder, and severe to moderate ADHD. And then got several concussions as well. One really bad one, which didn't help the process at all. Yeah. And so in the 1980s, we didn't have the vernacular, the drugs, or the therapy to deal with any of that. So I was what's known as a juvenile delinquent. So, I went from straight A's in 7th grade to failing in the 10th grade and quit. Went to an alternative school for a while with 7 kids in it, and even that was too much structure. So I quit that as well and became really a full-time alcoholic musician till the age of 36 when I finally got a diagnosis. Yeah. So, but it led to a very interesting background. I mean, I was like a real life outlaw for a couple of years there in my youth. Moved out to Minnesota, didn't clean up, but slowed down a little bit. Mm-hmm. And then finally, like I said, at 36, got my diagnosis, and I started writing professionally late. I think my first book that I wrote a bunch of books with my mom and 2 on my own. I think the first was in 2006. It came out early 2000s. Because kind of with that upbringing and my personality and mental issues, I rejected being a writer quite strongly for a while there, but then fell into it quite easily when it finally came about. And I managed to keep ties open to my parents despite what was going on. So it was, so then I've done a lot of weird stuff in my life and meet a lot of weird people and visited a lot of prisons, visited a lot of friends in prison, and got myself in dodgy situations that I then had to talk myself out of or fight or run my way out of. And it all helps kind of inform the writing. And I tend to write very, very dark and violent stuff because that's kind of how I saw the world for a long time. But it was very funny. I had someone was talking. I was online, and they were talking about how someone was yelling at him for writing bright, fluffy books, with happy endings and stuff. And I said, look, everything I write is dark, bleak stuff, and I think you should definitely write fluffy, fun stuff. There needs to be that out there, and I will be providing none of it. So I want people to write that,
Right.
Am I going to read
Right.
it? No, but it has to be there. Someone needs to write this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you say, like, and we were talking about this earlier, the experience, your life experience informing your writing. So what genre have you published in and written in? Because I've got some guesses based off of what you told me, but maybe
Well,
I'm off.
let's hear the guesses. Let's hear. And we'll see how close they are.
You did mention like rock
The fantasy.
star, right? Right. There was some music. So I'm guessing that we're talking something crime related. I don't think we're necessarily, I don't know that we're necessarily in the thriller category, but I know like there's got to be some criminal element in there somewhere, whatever it looks like.
There is often a bunch of criminal elements. So
Yeah.
with my mother, I wrote a bunch of YA and middle grade fantasy stuff.
Okay.
And my first two books were fantasy, but one of the reviewers called it fantasy noir. It was another one called it nihilistic. So it was very much urban. It was, but very much written in a crime fiction manner. I've always read primarily fantasy and, when I'm reading fiction I read fantasy, science fiction, crime, mystery, thriller, a lot of that. And I like to really, I'm a guy who so the top shelf back there is all books on writing. When I decided to write, like Emma, I bought all the writing books I could find and read all of them and really just spent a year or two reading those and really kind of working on the craft. And what I really like to do was take the books I liked, or found engaging and break them down to the sentence level of what is this author doing? Like up until recently, I really enjoyed all the Lee Child Reacher books. All right. Are they great fiction? No. Are they even good fiction? Probably not. Are they entirely engaging and you'll read them through in one sitting? Yes. So one of the things I did was break down a bunch of those and say, what is he doing at the sentence level that drives this along? And I adapted some of that to my own writing intentionally. There's a thing he does with partial sentences and dropping the subject from sentences, which both works it's an interesting technique because it both works in writing action scenes for it to go along smoothly, but it also works in quick stop emotional beats where it slows it down. It's interesting, but learning how to do that was fun. Another thing that you won't get from AI. But so then I do actually have a thriller series that I'm in the middle of. But it's horror thrillers with some there might be zombies involved. But really an action thriller. But then the main character is a sociopathic hitman. May or may not be based on some people I met in real life. Not an actual hitman, but definitely could have done the job if it was to his inclination. And then the fantasy series, very much grimdark. Very, very violent stuff. I'm a big fan of bringing realism into fantasy. Most of what the reading I do now is history. So I read a lot of ancient and medieval history just to, and it's interesting. I do a lot of talking about the level of accuracy in your books and what it needs to be, because we've already gone past the wide ranging topic, so I won't really cover it, but it's really, it can be very genre based, and and there's still limits on it. Like I do pretty accurate fantasy stuff, but honestly, I'm bad with fabrics. All right. And if you look at it, how fabrics are made and how they got traded back and forth and the history of it is a huge driver of civilization and changes in civilization. And I flat ignore it because I cannot, as they say, be arsed with it. It just doesn't grab my interest at all. So I try and be very realistic in like small group tactics, big group strategy, logistics, of the movement of armies. And, and another interesting thing, you can do that without making a big point of it. A guy, staff sergeant, does great breakdowns on fantasy stuff. And he points out that all the logistics of the armies in Lord of the Rings are perfect. They're exactly what armies with that equipment, how they split them, how they moved them, how that would have to happen. And that is not something you would think. When you think Lord of the Rings, you don't think, well, the tactics and the logistics of the orc armies, chef's kiss, was perfect. No one has ever said that. But when they did a deep dive into it, it's like, yeah, he was a World War I veteran. He understood why armies had to move and split up in separate ways and what it took to move, and he applied that. But he made no big deal of it. But it's part and parcel to my whole theory of internal consistency helps with suspension of disbelief. And it helps your book resonate in a way, especially when you're doing genre fiction. You need to get those details right. That internal consistency, like in a magic system or in space opera, in the technology, that's like the gravity of the story, where when it's great, no one notices it, but it holds everything together. And now the characters react with that. Without having to say that it's there, the characters react to it. And it gives them an internal realism that helps. We've drifted far off my story. My origin story. We've drifted far away from that.
And you said something I want to circle back to, because I told you I like to geek out on editing. On WrittenWell, you said you have a course or something on editing, or where is that? How can we find that? Or talk about what's in the course.
What is in the course? The course is writing the novel. And it is a full course from finding an idea. I'm a big guy on the ideas are all out there. Ideas are easy to get. Finding one that's going to work for a novel is harder. I talked about correlating my ideas. Eventually you start to learn, oh, wait, this is a short story idea, not a novel idea. Or you start a short story and you're like, I was going to write this 4,000 word short story, but now I have to put it aside because it's a novel. But so from the writing of it all the way through the editing and the revision process. So drafting, and split into 3 sections, which is really getting started, the first draft, revision. And I'm really proud of the revision stuff, because it's stuff that gets short shrift, I think, in a lot of the discussion on writing, is that importance. They talk about the importance of the editing process, and then they're kind of like, rewrite it, write it better.
And I don't hear a lot of authors talking about layering, so that makes me trust that your course might fit me really well.
Excellent. Yeah. The multiple passes is essential to me. But again, it's, I always tell people, look, if someone is telling you how to write, they're just trying to sell you something. If they tell you how they write, and then, more importantly, tell you why they write that way, that's going to be helpful to you, because you don't learn to write, you learn how you write. My very first agent told me that. She said on the phone, well, you're just learning how you write. And it really struck me. She was a great, just an absolute, one of the original New York agents. She was tough as hell. But that stuck with me. It's like, you don't learn to write, you learn how you write. So in all these books that I read, the best ones were always, here's what I do, here's why I do it, here is some ideas for how you could achieve the same results. Because it's results oriented. Here's how I achieve it, here's why I do it that way. If you can't do it that way, try and pick a way that gets you the same results, because I'm doing these things for a specific reason. Right. So not everyone is going to.
Is there anything in your courses that talk about how, when you do accidentally hit the market, maybe with your first orc book, how to iterate that, even if it was a complete accident and you don't normally write warm and fluffy?
Do it again, only better. Well, I mean, you can borrow some stuff from the old theory of albums in the music business. So I came over to writing from the music business, which was great, because it meant the publishing industry seemed positively above board and trustworthy compared to the music business. But one of the rules of that is you have your debut album, and then your second album should be exactly the same, and then your third album should be something completely different. So if your first book hits, you want your second book to be very similar, and then your third book, give it a twist. And if people have followed you there, then you're going to have them hooked. Now you've got a fan, because that last little twist in the third book that goes, oh, now I can follow this person because you're like, give them what they want again, and then let them know that you're going to grow with them. and then you're good.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the theory of it. How you do it, how you get excited to write something that you didn't want to write. Sometimes maybe you write the next one with a co-author. Maybe you guys decide that you're hiring a ghost writer, and it's
Emma?
and it's half of it. I would never do a full ghost written thing, though that's perfectly acceptable as well. But you could do a credited or uncredited co-author. I do a lot of co-authoring, and I love it because when you get a good co-author, you can just lean on each other's strengths, and you can go, I don't need to write this scene because this person. You can say they get to write all the fight scenes.
Yeah.
But I mean, you just have the same problem as with any book. Is just sitting down to write, and I feel like if your Warm and Fluffy hit big, I mean, you should be able to ride that excitement a little bit into sitting down and getting at least halfway through the bugger. You know what I mean? You're like, you know what? Today I'm just gonna shut my eyes and think about the money. Wow, I'm inspired as hell. And then the middle of the book is hard anyway. Even if you love what you're writing, the middle's a slog, man. So
it is. No matter what. All right. Well, if we had all the time in the world, I would want to keep going. Last, Adam, we're definitely going to have you back at some point in the near future.
Anytime. This was a great time.
This was a good conversation. I feel like we talked about a lot of different things, but we brought it back to the topic of like writing to market and how important that is. So it was very good. Thank you, as always, to Emma and Kelly, my two co-hosts, for joining me today. You guys, if it were just me, I can only entertain so much. You guys asked some great questions. Really appreciate it. It was great. And Adam, of course, thank you for joining us. Go ahead. I'll give you a few moments here. If you want to shout out some stuff about WrittenWell or your own books, whatever it happens to be, you have the floor.
WrittenWell.com, the place that will teach you all the skills necessary to succeed in self-publishing, regardless of genre, fiction, nonfiction, anything. We've got all the tools, courses, articles, videos, charts, everything you need to succeed. For my personal writing, if we're talking about writers, I got my How to Write Fantasy Novels, a 5-booklet series on how to write and publish fantasy novels, available at Amazon.com. You may have heard of it. Little startup going to sell books. I hear that their head is going to retire to pursue his dream of starting a independent bookstore. So. We haven't even got it. Oh, that's for next time. We'll talk why Amazon next time.
Right. Exactly. There you go. Hey, we'll tease that one. All right.
And also, I would say a shout out to BookFunnel. We didn't talk enough about you guys. I have used guys for years. You've helped me expand my email list. I use you for book magnets and some giveaways. The interface is very intuitive. I love it. Yeah. It's one of the few tools that when I was just starting out, that everyone I talked to said, oh, you should definitely get a BookFunnel account. They're like, absolutely, you need to do that. Do it right now. Stop talking to me. Get on and do it. So just a shout out to you guys. You guys are great. And this was a ton of fun.
Damon built a great product. I can't personally take credit for that. He built a great product. And yeah, we hear that all the time. And we do not take that for granted. It means a lot to hear that from you and to hear that from everybody else, all of our authors. It really does. So it never gets old when people tell us how much they love books.
It never gets old being told you're awesome. That's
yes. Every time it's like the first time we really, so we have people at Author Nation who would walk up to us, like, I love BookFunnel. That's all I have to say. Just wanted to come up here and tell you that. I was like, that doesn't get old. That doesn't get old.
I actually had that at a gig once. I'm standing with my friend Jen, and a woman walks up and she says, "You're really great at guitar. Loved hearing you play." And then walked away. And my friend Jen said, "Does that get weird?" I said, "Of all the weird parts of this job, that part never gets old." Someone says, "You're awesome," and then walks away. It's the best day ever. That's the best interaction you could hope for.
Yes, it is.
There's no downside.
And we don't take it for granted here. So thank you,
folks,
right. for watching. For those of you who are checking out the podcast, if you're here, go check out some more of the videos that we have on the channel. This is episode 7 of the podcast, so there's plenty more for you to check out. And we will see you all in the next one. Bye, guys.
Thank you for watching. Check out these other videos from BookFunnel, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.